Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're jumping right back to June 1576. We are heading straight into the yellow-soiled mountain pass of Haldighati. This isn't just a battle. We're talking about a legendary clash of empires, a moment where history literally holds its breath, and a fight that would come to define the very concept of resistance in the Indian subcontinent. Let's get into it.
Imagine standing in an incredibly narrow gorge, nestled deep within the Aravalli hills of Rajasthan. The sun is just starting to rise, and you can already feel the heat building. All around you, the dirt is this striking, vibrant yellow, which is actually where it gets the name Haldighati, meaning Turmeric Valley. But on this specific morning, you hear the thunderous war cries of vastly mismatched armies preparing for a fight to the absolute death. By nightfall, that famous yellow soil is going to turn completely red. Now, to really grasp this, we have to look at the sheer disparity between these two sides. On one hand, you've got the massive Mughal forces of Emperor Akbar, led by his trusted general Man Singh. This army is an absolute juggernaut. We're talking hundreds of war elephants, advanced gunners, and heavy cavalry. And on the other hand, you have Maharana Pratap's fiercely loyal but much smaller coalition of Rajput warriors and indigenous Bhil archers. They're relying entirely on agile cavalry and their intimate, deep knowledge of this rugged terrain.
So, here is the crucial point. This was a true David versus Goliath scenario. The historical sources tell us that over 10,000 heavily armed Mughal troops were facing down just 3,000 Mewar cavalrymen, alongside about 400 Bhil archers. That is a 4-to-1 disadvantage for Maharana Pratap. Honestly, any conventional tactician would tell you this battle should have been over before it even began.
Section 1. The Roots of Rebellion. To figure out why 3,000 men would willingly ride into a meat grinder on this bloody morning, we need to rewind a bit. How did the Kingdom of Mewar become this last standing rock against a massive wave of Mughal expansion? Well, the Mughal Empire had been steadily growing since 1526. And by the time Akbar took the throne in 1556, he launched a really aggressive campaign to consolidate power across India. Other Rajput states eventually surrendered, or they formed marriage alliances with Akbar to keep the peace. But Mewar? They absolutely refused. This defiance led to the brutal siege of Chittorgarh in 1568, where Akbar's forces massacred tens of thousands of civilians. That massive trauma pushed a young Pratap into the mountains, leaving him with a bitter, unbreakable vow of total independence from Mughal rule. You see, this whole conflict wasn't just about controlling trade routes or holding onto territory. It was fundamentally driven by a concept called Swabhiman. It basically translates to a deep-seated self-respect and pride. It was literally the ideological engine driving Mewar. Maharana Pratap made a sacred oath that he would sleep on the hard floor and eat from leaf platters until his homeland was completely free. His Swabhiman absolutely forbade him from bowing down to an emperor he viewed as a foreign conqueror. And the actual breaking point that led straight to Haldighati, it happened during a really tense diplomatic dinner. Akbar had sent his general, Man Singh, who was actually a Rajput himself, to convince Pratap to surrender. But Pratap straight up refused to eat with him. Why? Because Man Singh's family had formed a marriage alliance with the Mughal dynasty, which Pratap considered a profound betrayal of Rajput honor. Man Singh was completely humiliated. He stormed out, issuing this chilling declaration of war, promising to crush the Maharana's pride right there on the battlefield.
Section 2. The Elephants and the Steed.
So, back on the battlefield. Despite those overwhelming odds we just talked about, Pratap's forces perfectly utilized the narrow, thorny terrain of Haldighati. His vanguard launched this lightning-fast shock and awe attack that sent the Mughal front lines scrambling back into their own troops in absolute chaos. For a brief, wild moment, the tiny Mewar army was actually winning. But then, as the fighting spilled out into the open plains, Akbar's gunners found their footing. They unleashed a devastating volley of musket fire. And you just can't fight bullets with swords. This forced a massive, immediate change in tactics.
To counter all that gunfire, both sides brought out the heavy artillery of the ancient world, war elephants. Imagine these massive beasts clashing right in the middle of the carnage. The most famous of them was Mewar's prized elephant, Ram Prasad, who was causing total devastation among the Mughal ranks. Eventually, though, his rider was killed by an arrow and Ram Prasad was captured. Akbar was so thrilled he renamed the elephant Pir Prasad and offered him the absolute finest foods. But in a stunning display of loyalty, the captured elephant completely refused to eat any Mughal food, eventually starving to death 18 days later.
While that's happening, the battle is just raging on.
Enraged by the death of his commander, Maharana Pratap spots his nemesis, Man Singh, commanding the Mughal forces from atop his own elephant. So Pratap drives his fiercely loyal horse Chetak right through the chaos, straight up to Man Singh's elephant. In a totally incredible display of agility, Chetak actually planted his front hooves right onto the elephant's tusks. Pratap hurled his spear with all his might. It narrowly missed killing the Mughal general, striking and killing the elephant's driver instead.
Section 3. A tactical retreat. At this point, the Mughal forces were exhausted. They were dying in the extreme summer heat and were literally on the verge of a full retreat. But then, suddenly, a Mughal commander named Mekhtar Khan initiated a brilliant piece of ancient fake news. He loudly beat the war drums and started screaming that Emperor Akbar himself was arriving with massive fresh reinforcements. Now, it was a total lie, but it worked flawlessly. The fleeing Mughal troops rallied, and the exhausted Mewar forces were tricked into believing they were about to be completely overrun.
Seeing that the situation was now completely unwinnable, Pratap's commanders begged him to retreat so he could fight another day. To save their leader, a remarkably brave noble named Jala Man Singh essentially committed suicide for his king. He grabbed Pratap's royal umbrella and insignia, which are of course the ultimate targets on any battlefield. By making himself look like the king, he intentionally drew the entirety of the furious Mughal army towards himself, dying as a decoy just so the Maharana could slip away into the hills. And this right here perfectly captures the legendary bond between man and beast. Pratap's horse, Chetak, was bleeding heavily at this point. Remember when he reared up on the elephant? Well, a sword attached to the elephant's trunk had sliced Chetak's leg wide open. But despite this fatal injury, Chetak carried his master away from the pursuing army. Coming across a massive, incredibly wide river trench, the wounded steed made one final, impossible leap across it to carry his master to safety. He collapsed and died right after. Pratap supposedly wept over his faithful companion.
Section 4. The Guerrilla War. Following Haldighati, the Mughals technically occupied the region's shore, but they couldn't catch Pratap. Refusing to surrender, Pratap used the treacherous Aravalli Hills as an impenetrable fortress. He formed a tight, crucial partnership with the local Bhil tribes, who knew those forests intimately. Together, they executed a flawless, relentless guerrilla war. They'd launched these rapid, surprise attacks and then completely cut off all Mughal supply lines to their fort at Gogunda. It got so bad for the occupying Mughal troops that they literally starved. The historical texts say they were even forced to slaughter and eat their own horses just to survive.
Pratap patiently rebuilt his resources over 6 grueling years. Then, in 1582, at the Battle of Dewar, he finally unleashed his revenge. His reorganized forces struck the Mughal outposts with such sudden, devastating surprise that it completely broke the back of the Mughal occupation. The result was absolutely staggering. 36,000 Mughal soldiers surrendered. That's a massive, decisive victory for Mewar. The historical accounts of the Battle of Dewar describe a fight so fierce and a king so driven by years of hardship in the jungles that when Pratap faced the ruthless Mughal commander Bahlo Khan in single combat, he didn't just defeat him. According to the texts, with a single strike of his heavy sword, Pratap cleft Bahlo Khan, who was wearing full armor, mind you, along with his armored horse, completely in two. Literally split them right down the middle.
Section 5. An Immortal Legacy. Just look at the immediate fallout from all of this. Even though the Mughals technically held the field at Haldighati and planted their flag, Emperor Akbar was far from happy. Actually, he was so infuriated that Pratap had escaped and that Mewar remained completely unsubdued that he took away his own victorious general's privileges. He temporarily banned both Man Singh and Asaf Khan from even entering his royal court. The mighty Mughal Empire had won the battle for sure, but they realized pretty quickly they were losing the war.
Decades later, Maharana Pratap passed away in 1597 from a hunting injury, having reclaimed almost his entire kingdom. When the news finally reached Akbar's court in Lahore, the Mughal emperor, Pratap's lifelong enemy, was reportedly moved to tears. He realized he could never conquer that spirit. This incredible dynamic is captured perfectly in a poem recited by court poet Dursa Ada right in front of Akbar. He said, "You never bowed your turban. Today, hearing of your death, the emperor's head bows and tears flow from his eyes. You have won, Pratap."
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a final thought. We've just watched a massive empire clash against a tiny, fractured kingdom.
But when a small force, driven entirely by Swabhiman, or pure self-respect, stands against the greatest empire of its time for decades, even surviving on starvation diets out in the wilderness, who really wins the war? Does true victory lie in conquering the physical land, or does it lie in remaining completely unconquered in spirit? Think about that for a bit. Catch you in the next explainer.